Hi, it's Ted Ritzer, host of the Greening Government Webinar Speaker Series. It's a collaboration between my department, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Alberta Climate Change Office, and the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre. The goals of the series are to help governments in Alberta reduce their carbon footprint and to help them grow their green economy. Now, it was the whole webinars today have been really I'll blame Mark Anielski because he did a presentation on sort of on the theme of financing Alberta's green economy, but really at the core of that presentation was a little bit of a history lesson on ATB Financial, but more strategically, the role that ATB could play within Alberta. And then just recently, I saw a press release, so he got me interested in ATB, and I saw this press release on November 15th that spoke to ATB is actually leading Canada, if not North America, in the use of a blockchain-based digital identity platform called Sovereign. And so, you know, the whole series of webinars today, I owe a debt to Mark for inspiring that. But Mark has just recently returned from Tahiti, and he had some pretty interesting conversations related to the theme of Mark's new book, which will be released in January or February on the well-being economy. So I'll turn it over to Mark Anielski.
Thanks, Ted. Actually, my book will be out in early May, end of April, by the same publisher, New Society publisher, and it's called An Economy of Well-Being. And the theme of the book is really building on my first book, The Economics of Happiness, to provide more of a practical tools and practices for governments, for municipalities, for First Nations, to focus on well-being as the kind of ultimate bottom line of progress, whether it's, you know, replacing, not necessarily replacing GDP, but certainly complementing GDP with measuring what Bobby Kennedy said, the things that actually make life worthwhile. So yes, I just came back from a 2-week project in Tahiti. It's hard to believe you can go to paradise and remind them that you know, measuring happiness is actually a practical thing and public policy approach to assessing progress. So I was there with a team developing a well-being index for part of the island. They have little sections of the island called communes. They're like slivers of land that go from the ocean to the mountaintop. And so worked with the team to develop a well-being survey, and the survey is still being conducted, and it will provide a snapshot of people's perceived well-being, everything from the quality of their sleep, their spirituality, their sense of life satisfaction, financial sufficiency. So we're going to get a really robust profile of how people perceive their quality of life beyond the sort of conventional statistics. So that actually, we had several conversations as well. French Polynesia is a colony. It is a Polynesian culture. The Maori are the younger sisters of the Tahitians, as are the Hawaiians. So you have this really old Polynesian culture, which used to use seashells as currency, as money. And those shells actually found their way into Alberta, into Edmonton, as a form of a medium of exchange. So I came back with laden with shell lays, which they give you when you depart. And so if I can convert those to Bitcoins, they're probably worth millions of dollars today. But of course, they're worth nothing because there's no shell economy left. But anyways, I digress a bit, only to say that what I was fascinated by is the sort of examination of their historical understanding of economics, of economy, of money, and this new kind of theme of well-being. And it really resonated with them a lot. And they have this very old, very simple language. They use very few words. If you go to Hawaii, they don't have that many words. I think they've simplified life into a few real sound bites. Words like aloha, which means love, It's amazing when you say aloha, you're saying I love you, which is interesting. So I'll kick it off with that. I know, Ted, we're going to have a conversation about the future of everything, maybe Alberta's future in terms of blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, ATV, asset-based economic model.
Well, Mark, what's the fundamental framework that you're going to introduce in your new book? I know, and certainly in the first presentation that you did within this series, what I remember was a discussion of 4 fundamentals, and one of them really capturing something that isn't captured within the GDP, the intangibles.
Yeah. Yeah, so I come with an accounting background. I spent years, as I said the last time, in 14 years in Alberta government, Alberta finance or treasury at the time. And I currently sit on the provincial audit committee for the province. And my argument has been that governments lack a proper balance sheet. There's no proper accounting for natural assets. There's no proper accounting for things like relationships or trust as kind of intangible assets. And it's not that we can't measure those things, or accountants can't put kind of an assessment on things like trust, which is one of the most important assets of all. It's that in some cases, in the case of natural capital, I've learned that there has been what actually the Accounting Standards Board in Toronto told me that there's been a long-standing prohibition, they use that word prohibition, on the valuation of natural assets. I said, what do you mean? Like, how is that possible? We know that trees and oil and gas are valuable, but why would you prohibit an accounting of them? And there's no real clear answer to that. But what we have now is an opportunity, though, to actually formally measure these assets, these intangibles, value them at least in a qualitative sense, even if they're never formally monetized, and then govern ourselves based on a proper assessment of the condition of those intangible assets. For example, I can ask people, how much do you trust your local government? How much do you how much do you trust your that metric that reveals something about the strength of the relationship that people have, with each other, with the government. Some politicians probably don't want to hear that news. I can tell you in Tahiti, about 18% of people to the survey so far have said, we don't trust the government, and no, 18%, sorry, said we kind of trust the government. So the lack of confidence is very low. And so I think these intangible assets are important markers of progress and obviously success, as whether you're a business or you're a government.
Well, and would that more complete accounting that includes obviously the value of nature, the value of our environment. I mean, the whole point about trying to deal and respond the best that we can with the wicked problems like climate change. I mean, if you could actually get governments around the world to agree to a full accounting that actually took into account things like the impact on the environment. I mean, like, Mark, the whole idea of the economy existing independent of the environment makes no sense to me.
It makes no sense. I think I was telling you just before we got on the line, I happened to meet the grandson of the 85-year-old chief of the Maori Nation, which is like 40,000 people. And he's the head of land stewardship management planning. And he announced in Tahiti that the Maori have been successful in securing the rights of the river as a person. So that is profound. That just happened this spring. So it's the first jurisdiction that has said the river, the ecosystem has its own inherent rights to do what? To flourish. How is it that human beings have declared a right to extract from nature without any proper accounting of the impacts on nature, the liabilities we pose on it? And so this is really profound, that the river now is considered a person. Now the question is, well, who still speaks for the river? The river can't speak for itself. But we as human beings now have a responsibility to be in right relationship with the river. The Hawaiians and the Polynesian have a word pono, which means to be right, or to have a right relationship. And so this is pretty cool stuff. Now it'll fundamentally change the way we think about resource rights. The power of the crown. Who's the crown? Well, New Zealand, like us, we're all part of the crown. But now in New Zealand, you're going to see the crown and the Maori working together to determine what is in the best interest of the river to flourish, right? So I think that's an exciting future, and I think it's going to come here to Canada as well. And I think our First Nations have a lot to teach us about, and that's just a practical thing about our relationship with the environment. The accounting, as you know, the accounting systems don't count for carbon as an unfunded liability or as an asset. And those things can be treated properly. And at the very least, we should recognize that we do impose these liabilities on nature, and they will come back to haunt us if we don't treat them properly.
Well, and maybe for our viewers, Mark, if you could kind of review your fundamental framework of full cost accounting for the folks.
So the fundamental in the accounting world, if having been in the audit world, the basis of accounting was established about 500 years ago, and probably before that, by two Italians. One was Leonardo da Vinci, who everyone knows, but there was another guy named Luca Pacioli, who was a Franciscan monk, who was a mathematician, and he was teaching Venetian and Florentian business people how to take better account of their business. So the basis of accounting is you start with inventory. So you take a physical inventory of the stock. You're auditing a Honda dealership. You're actually literally going, into the inventory, measuring how many Honda Accords there are. And then you worry about the market valuation. So that's also true of any other asset, whether it's nature. So we do take inventory of forests, and we're kind of trying to get a handle on carbon. But it starts with that basic idea of inventory. And the inventory can include a qualitative assessment. So I could say, well, what's the quality of the wetland? I know it's a wetland, but so working with Ducks Unlimited, how integral or how vibrant is this wetland that we're looking at? We need ecologists to help us do that. And then the valuation of the wetland, the conversion into some monetary expression is really that's actually the easy part. You think that's the hard part. Actually, that's kind of the easiest part. Because as I've explained to my students for many years, business students, is the word value means, in Latin, means to be worthy or strong. But the valuation in money terms is an interesting issue, because money itself has no inherent value. It is created as a social invention that we created out of our imagination. And the fundamental truth is the money that we see in society and use has no connection to those assets at all. It is created by the banks when they issue loans. So there's no tie to the balance sheet or the assets of the nation, the assets of the ecosystem, the watershed in which we live. And it's unbelievable that we have a money system that's divorced and separated from the very essence of our both our own nature, but nature's nature. And the indigenous people, when they say all my relations, they mean all my relations. They consider Mother Earth, the watershed, the trees as their ancestors, as their relatives. And they say, you would never treat your ancestors, your grandparents, the way we do now if you understood them to be your relations. So.
Well, it's interesting with this discussion today, Mark, that you kind of inspired me to take a look at the ATB. Recently, Chris Reagan, who's the chairman of the Eco-Fiscal Commission of Canada, sent me a little bit of a blurb on Don Tapscott has started a new company that's using blockchain to create a carbon trading system. And I got an email from Rachel Mock with the World Bank that the World Bank is using blockchain to do the same darn thing. So, I mean, your discussion about full cost accounting and, using this sort of a high tech and using that, that's what this whole premise of the IBM Hyperledger project, and that's what that technology, blockchain-based digital identity technology is all about. It could provide a basis to do just like Don Tapscott and the World Bank are doing for carbon trading. But what happens when somebody opts out as far as carbon,
Yeah, I mean, for those of us who have delved into the esoteric nature of blockchain and cryptocurrency, because it's kind of, let's face it, still for geeks. But that said, it's a really old idea in technology. I mean, if you think about nature as an algorithm that has, some functionality, I mean, that's really what we're trying to do with blockchain, to say, look, we're going to codify these ecological or basically the complex interrelationships that exist in society and an economy. And ideally, we have a public blockchain system in which nobody owns, I've said this before, is that every person born has about 740,000 hours to live. And right now what's happening and it's been happening for centuries, is that your time is basically compromised. It's already spoken for. It's in a sense stolen when the banks are able to create money against your time. How do they do that? They do that through mortgages, through loans. You're literally bonded. You're literally being leveraged to create money out of thin air, and then expected to work for it, and then work. Plus, you got to work for the interest that they've attached to this money. Now, in an ideal blockchain future, every person is individual sovereign. So your birth certificate says Ted Ritzer, 740,000 hours, worth $10 an hour. You do the math, you're an asset worth that much. Now, the question is that the future that we're moving to? Or are we moving to yet another casino kind of economy, which is the Bitcoin right now? Speculative, fun, exciting, but not really in harmony with nature by any means, not even tied to nature. Bitcoin is modeled after gold. So my vision of the future is a public blockchain where nobody has the right to tell you how to use your time. You trade your time and which represent your gifts. Everyone will sleep 8 hours, hopefully a day, right? And so, you talk that, and then the question is, well, how are you going to use your 8 hours of potential productive time to contribute to society? What's the best use of your time? Those are all interesting things that we can think about as economists as we do our macro modeling. And then you can add to that the blockchain of nature, which would be, in my opinion, be based on optimizing the functionality of nature. That as ecologists, we know when a forest is healthy, or at least we believe nature tells us that. And so we're not going to just harvest the maximum number of trees anymore. We're hopefully going to steward the land so that the trees are healthy, that all the ecological services are in optimum state, and we can create as much crypto currency as we need to achieve those goals. And that to me is a really exciting future. Imagine people sitting around Treasury boards saying, how much crypto do we need to create for Alberta to make sure, we're producing enough oil, but it's also in harmony with the Athabasca River, right?
Well, you would have loved the presentation that Yogi from Helsinki did first thing this morning, and what he did for the Ministry of Communication and Transportation for Finland was they have developed sort of a methodology or model that looks at identity in a way that uses the blockchain to sort of protect privacy, while at the same time allowing an exchange of data, so big data and AI. It's like all that stuff that you were just saying that seems like science fiction. But I mean, the UK company called DeepMind, which has just been acquired by Google, actually set up an office here in Edmonton because of the guys at the U of A who are leading in that type of analysis. So, I mean, it all sounds completely far-fetched, and yet this is what, these institutions are doing. But, one of the things that I got a chuckle out of Dr. Phil Windley today, who was presenting, and he's actually the Chief Information Officer for Brigham Young University and a past Chief Information Officer for the state of Utah. He was kind of talking about, well, don't you think it's a little goofy that, we've got some technologies like, Google, Facebook, and Twitter, for example, that their whole profit model is based on sharing and selling personal data that we give up. But what do we give it up for? We give it up for a free Gmail account and to be able to watch cat videos.
Yeah. And a younger guy, much younger than me, the other day, he wants to be my marketing agent because I know I'm not very savvy at social media. I try, but until I went to Tahiti, I never posted even one picture on Facebook. And I'm like, all right, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And and he reminded me the most precious thing that we have, the thing that matters the most to social media is our attention. Like, where do we put our attention? When we open Facebook, what do we look at, right? What do we click on? What do we watch? We're certainly not, most of us aren't watching CNN anymore. So that's interesting. So it's our attention, which is the most precious of all assets, of course, which is time. So then the question is, well, how do these, in a sort of utopia, maybe dystopian future, will every hour, every minute of our attention be monitored, right? I mean, I could guess it's already being monitored by the NSA now. So it's like, that's nothing. Edward Snowden basically said that, right? And so, well, yeah. But my point is that my time, my attention is the most precious asset. And again, no one can tell me how to focus my attention. Well, they could try to. They can say, well, you have to work, you have to be responsible and go to work and get a government job or whatever and pay the mortgage. That's a responsible thing to do. All right, that's something our parents taught us. But are we going to invest our most precious asset of all in ensuring that the world is a better place, right? That I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm being the best I can be with the talents that I was given. So I bring that back to the education system. The word education in Latin means to draw forth what's already in you. Is that what we're doing in the education system with our kids? Or are we just pumping them full of, pushing knowledge on them and expecting them to regurgitate it on an exam? And you get through university and an MBA and you still don't know why you're here on the planet, right? And no one's even talked to you about what's Ted going to be. Ted's going to be doing Green Government Series one day. Who would have thought, who would have thought that I would be sitting here talking to you after 15 years of sitting in Alberta Treasury and, anyways, I digress.
but your point though, Mark, about the attention economy, I mean, there's at least one author who has written, Tim Wu, has written a whole book on the attention economy. And that's exactly what we're in the middle of right now. It's like, what are people willing to spend their time? You talk about attention economy, and you look at right now where you look at of each and every dollar that is generated with new digital advertising, Facebook and Google get 99 cents of that dollar. So how in the heck can we have a news industry, and I'm talking about real news, not fake news, how can we have a viable news industry in Canada with the economics?
Exactly. And but before I get off this, I want to make a very important point, and it's about the public blockchain money system future. Most people, and it sort of relates to the ATB, most people don't understand that the central bank, if it's owned by the people, which the Bank of Canada still, as a Federal Reserve, is not owned by the people, it's a private bank. In theory, a public bank, whether it's the central bank, the Bank of Canada, or in way, ATB is our bank, it's our public bank, but we don't treat it that way currently. But in principle, the central bank and the state or provincial banks can create as much liquidity as needed for the economy. We should never ever run a deficit. There's no, in fact, you could argue we should never charge taxes, because in a perfect, AI blockchain future, we create as much liquidity as needed for the 4.2 million people of this province to flourish, along with the ecosystem. So imagine that. Imagine saying we can create as much or as little as we need. And it's never will there be a question of there's not enough money, we'll be complaining about running deficits. That will never, ever happen. That should never happen in the future. And that's a picture I'm trying to paint. Can we get there tomorrow? Probably not. There'll be lots of grieving and people will say that's irresponsible, but I would challenge any economist, any banker to say, why not? That is actually within our capacity, not just our imagination. And that, to me, is the future. And so we'll work less. The AI, people say, what about the AI future? I said, isn't it interesting? We call it artificial intelligence. What happened to original intelligence? But in an AI future, I can already tell you that if I ran for prime minister, my campaign would be, I'm going to give you a 2.5 day work week, guaranteed. I could knock Mr. Trudeau out in a moment. I might not live very long. People might be upset. But the point is that when we eliminate some of these costs that are currently in the system, the cost of interest burden on the economy, we can get to that 2-day work week. And then with an AI future, it could be even less.
Well, let's revisit what you educated me on in that second presentation, Mark, and that was the history of the ATB when Aberhart was faced after just post-depression Alberta, and when he went to Wall Street and Bay Street and couldn't get a nickel to invest in Alberta. That's when the idea for both Alberta Bucks and the ATB came to the fore, because we couldn't get any money.
That's correct. We were bankrupt. Aberhart went to C.H. Douglas in England and invited him here. I mean, Aberhart wasn't that sophisticated either. I think Douglas, who was in the money system, he got in Britain. As Aberhart here, creating your own, obviously creating your own currency was an act of war against the central bank, which makes sense from a dominion, from Canada's perspective. But they did allow them to create ATB, which is now the biggest public bank in North America, much larger than the Bank of North Dakota. Now, the interesting thing I found out since we had the last TED Talk, I call it a TED Talk because you're Ted. It's the original TED Talk.
Well, the other thing that I learned from you guys in that last presentation, Mark, was the whole idea of the U.S. banking system and derivatives, and these poor Americans losing their houses while, the U.S. government came out with, well, it was, the U.S. banking industry is too big to fail, and the poor individual citizen was kind of up the creek with their mortgage and foreclosures.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to say that the strength of having a public bank. Well, there's growing interest now in the U.S. State of New Jersey, new governor. He's a pro-public bank guy. Philadelphia, Berkeley, and so I'm here as a Canadian going, I think ATB could be an ambassador. We could show them how our model works. So could Bank of North Dakota. The difference I've learned between the Bank of North Dakota and ATB is providing full financial services, full basically retail banking services, where Bank of North Dakota doesn't. But the Bank of North Dakota is acting as a proper public bank by issuing state loans and state infrastructure financing to the state of North Dakota at cost. That's important. That means it can provide the debt financing for the infrastructure program, the transportation networks, the restoring of the infrastructure. And when I say at cost, because the public bank doesn't have to generate a profit legally, if you read the ATB Act, doesn't have to generate a profit, doesn't pay taxes, is owned by the people of the province. It is a crown jewel that no other province or U.S. state has. And so we could actually expand the benefits, the services of ATB in line with what North Dakota is doing.
So, Mark, what do you say to us opening up the discussion broader to the participants through the online Q&A window, and give the folks participating a chance to pose some questions directly to you? How's that?
Absolutely. I just thought it was you and I talking, but no.
No, it's no longer a TED Talk.
It's no longer.
It's a everyone talk. So please submit questions through the online Q&A window. But you know, it strikes me as we have this wonderful opportunity within Alberta, you know, and taking advantage of that made in Alberta financial institution, which until you guys, hi.
I'm under a real pressure to get something out quick, and I can hear every word you're saying.
Oh, poor thing. See ya. So I have to speak quieter and let
we're disturbing.
Yes, I'm disturbing someone, so I will try and speak a little quieter, and I will try and repeat the questions so much quieter, Mark.
Maybe I'm shouting or something. I don't know.
No, I'm the one that's shouting. So maybe reflecting on what was presented a little bit within the presentation by the guy from the government of Finland. They have a really interesting take on things, those and the government of Estonia. And they really have embraced this whole idea of digital identity. And, you know, I think that's something. The other thing that both that presenter and Dr. Phil Windley had mentioned was what the European Union has done looking at their general data protection regulation, which will be implemented as of May 25th, 2018. And it seems to me that the Europeans and the Scandinavian countries have actually done a really good job of being proactive.
Right.
And protecting privacy.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. And I really like what the Sovereign platform, the premise of Sovereign is as well. I mean, isn't that the key, is how do we ensure that our, you know, we could, of course we can protect our own time, because, you know, that's something we use discretionarily, but information, you know, any other kind of digitized or any data on us should be, we should know what people know about us, right? I should actually know what CSIS knows about me, you know, and I hope that would be nice, or the NSA, or, you know, but that's maybe going a bit too far. But, you know, like, how long have we been at this sort of digitization of healthcare records? And it's unbelievable. I mean, how many years has IBM been working for the province trying to do that? And I still don't have a, you know, I don't have a record of my last checkup on my iPhone. Like, how is that possible?
Well, so folks out there, if you would like to pose, I'll give you a couple more minutes to pose some questions, and then we'll see. Well,
maybe the Christmas shopping time.
Yes.
So you just had this conversation with the Estonian or Finlandians?
Yeah, Yogi presented first thing this morning, Mark, at 9 a.m.
Excellent. I can't wait to watch that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, though. I do ask the question: is anyone going, that other to that another level where that I'm talking about is, and I'm not sure we necessarily want to go to that level where even your hours are blockchained, and because maybe that's a Orwellian world. I'm not convinced it is where we want to go, but the point is somehow we need to understand that we're currently not really sovereign.
Yeah. Well, how about this, Mark? If you would conclude with advice for folks within Alberta working for various governments, from your perspective, where we should be headed.
Well, my main line of work is, trying to measure, what Bobby Kennedy said. Let's measure what matters. Let's at least attempt to move towards a true total asset-based system of governance. Just finished a major project with the town of Valley View, doing work with First Nations, which is all based on looking at assets in the community. That could be people, relationships, natural assets, and then putting those into a integrated management system where we talk about asset management, but really we're focused on infrastructure, built assets. But we want to, my proposal is we look at the integration of all those asset classes, and we make well-being the ultimate bottom line of our societies, our communities. And so we're going to measure, and we're going to, what I learned from the Tahitians, it was an old man who stood up and he said, thank you for coming and bringing this survey, this well-being survey tool to us, because he said, the truth is, and I'm sitting right next to the President Tamaru, now the ex-president, but we still call him president. And he said, politicians never ask us how we feel about life. They have their ideas and their agenda, and that's fine. But he said, when we fill out the survey about how we feel, how we feel about our well-being and our quality of our sleep and our relationships with our family and our neighbors, use that information. And when it's even sold, it's never going to be sold. But the point is, the point he was making is that this is such a transparent self-evaluation and a societal evaluation about who we are and how we feel. And the results are just coming in, but they're so powerful, because I never asked one question about what you do for money, for work. We just asked how people feel about their well-being, and we hope that it will shape the way the country then. The election's coming up next year, national election. Hopefully it'll shape the way they talk about their next 3 or 4 years of governance. And hopefully this well-being measurement approach becomes standardized, just as GDP has become standardized in the last 70 years. So that's kind of my suggestion to governments, that, and it's just so intuitively obvious that we would ask these questions, and we would honor the responses from citizens, because some of the responses, I just told you, people aren't very happy with their politicians, certainly not in French Polynesia, and that just means we have a lot of room to grow and improve that relationship.
Well, thanks so much for agreeing to do this, Mark. It's excellent.
Thanks, Ted. That was fun.
So have a wonderful Christmas if I don't chat with you before Christmas.
Thank you. You too, and to your family.
Okay. Take care now.
Bye for now.